So I wanted to make a fully smocked bodice dress for my daughter's Valentine's Day outfit this year, and here is the foolproof method that I used mixed with one magical, absolutely magical product. I love this stuff, so you can do the same. To get started, this method will work with any pattern line, but you want to have a bodice pattern piece and not a yoke pattern piece. This means that your pattern piece will have the entire arm's eye. You don't have to smock all the way down, but you do need to have the entire arm's eye to construct your garment properly. So step 1, decide how long your dress needs to be. So I took my fabric, gave it an ironing, and then measured how long my fabric needs to be in order to complete the dress. When you are figuring out this measurement, you should start at the top of the shoulder, like where the shoulder seam will go, and end where you'd like your hem to be. Keep in mind to allot enough fabric if you want a wide hem, or if you simply just need a little bit of seam allowance for some lace. Just think about all the options and which direction you are headed towards with your dress. After all, it is sewing, so you do you. I am using Speckler Vogel's Satin Batiste, which is an heirloom quality fabric, and absolutely love ripping fabrics. It's very accurate and quite easy too. I do this for 2 pieces of fabric that go from one selvage edge to the next selvage edge. I'm going to have a fully smocked front as well as back to my dress. And how wide does your fabric need to be? A good rule of thumb is 3x, but that also depends on personal preference, what type of fabric you're smocking up, the style you're going for. Picture smocking will require a tighter ratio than that. Just do a test piece and adjust from there. I also have a PDF download that you might find helpful. Step 2, decide how long to pleat. I ironed my fabric and rolled it up on my dowel and then brought over my pleater. I measured how much pleating I wanted on my dress. If you only want the yoke portion to be pleated, you can absolutely do this, or you can pleat past the arm's eye like I'm doing. I started pleating, and yep, I realized I hadn't threaded my needles. You definitely need to thread your needles. I know that's some real expert advice here, and it is free, y'all. Whenever I pleat, I'm careful to start really square to my pleater, so that initial edge of fabric should be as parallel to the pleating rods as you can get it. And then I let my pleater do the work. I'm simply guiding the fabric through, keeping it steady on the same notch, and unloading the needles. But I am not pulling on my fabric. This is how you can get into a hot mess in a hurry. Just let the pleater do the work for you and you will be good to go. Here is a nifty little trick that you may not know about. If you are pleating multiple pieces, you can do one right after the other without having to rethread your needles. Just leave the first piece on those needles to keep your thread secure, and then put your next piece of fabric through your pleater. Simple as that. Isn't that lovely? When all your pleating is done, pull off your fabric and make sure you have plenty of thread to work with. Step 3, blocking using the magic product. To begin blocking, I tie off the threads on one side. So I pull out a little bit, say half an inch or so beyond the selvage edge. I don't want that selvage edge to be included in my seam, so I'm leaving myself half an inch of seam allowance. And then I tie these threads into groups of 2s or 3s. I pull on all those threads until the knots are flush with the first pleat, and then I trim up the ends. From there, I take my pattern piece, and here is the real magic. I trace it onto some freezer paper. This product is incredible. Before I discovered this product, I tried back smocking using a ton of pins, giving that Soline glue pin a whirl, basting by hand, so many different ways, but freezer paper gives the best results and it's the easiest, since when is that a combination? I arrange the template so the top corner of the shoulder is in line with the first pleating line, and I make sure the side seam is about half an inch onto the flat fabric so I have some seam allowance to sew into later on. For now, I am not concerned with the pleats. I am only worried about the width of the front of my dress. One thing at a time here, folks. So I pull out the threads on the other side, again about half an inch of seam allowance, and then I get the width pinned down, pulling the pleating threads tight so there is no slack, and I tie that side into groups of 2s or 3s. Now some people have told me they have issues placing knots where they want them. I take my threads, pinch where I want the knot and wrap my threads through. That makes it so the knot cinches down where my fingers are pinched, and it works out well for me, and I hope this method helps y'all if you have issues. I trim up that side, and now that the width of the dress is secure, I can focus on adjusting those pleats so they are evenly distributed. I like to kind of comb them, if you will, with my fingers. I find that's the easiest way to move them around. And then I place that freezer paper template onto my block piece of fabric with the shiny side of the freezer paper facing down. Again, I make sure to align the top corner of the shoulder seams to the first pleating thread, and then I center the entire template so each side seam overhangs about 1/2 inch. And then I iron that into place with a dry iron, so no steam is being used here. I place the iron onto my pleats, but I don't let the full weight of my iron onto the fabric. That runs the risk of squashing your pleats down. Finally, I let the freezer paper cool off, and then everything becomes fairly secure. If you pick up your freezer paper fabric assembly while it's still warm, the freezer paper can just peel away, which is not a big deal, just re-iron her down, but it also doesn't secure your pleats down, so you do want to wait a few minutes for it to cool off. Step 4, securing the blocking down. Alrighty, this is a fun step, y'all. I like to decrease my stitch length to about 1.2, 1.5, something around there, so you have more stitches going through more pleats. And simply stitch around the freezer paper. There is absolutely no residue to freezer paper, so it will not hurt your machine if you stitch through it, and then you can carefully tear away the freezer paper. How cool! Sometimes a stitch will pop here or there, but it's no biggie since the pleats before and after are still secure. So if that happens, just sew over that little spot again. Step 5, one extra step for the back. If you are making a fully smock back, you will repeat the same process that we just went over, but with one extra step to allow for the placket. So I take my pattern piece and fold it along the lap line. This is not the same line as the center back line. The gap between those two lines will give you the space to put in a placket. I trace 2 back pieces onto the freezer paper, making sure to flip the back piece over for that second round. And I repeat the same, pulling out 1/2 inch of seam allowance and tying off into groups of 2s or 3s as we did with the front. But this time we need one extra step of pulling the threads at the center back up. We are pulling these threads up and getting them out of the way. And so I cut these threads and I pull them out about 1/2 inch past the center back for the seam allowance for that placket. You could do 1/4 inch if you want to, you could do 3/8, but you do need to have some seam allowance there to attach your placket to. I do this on both sides of center back, and I've marked my center back with a little line using a friction heat activated pin. And once those threads are pulled out, I move them out of my way, and yuppers, I cut right down the middle. It is really not that scary, y'all. You can do this. And now you can focus on each back side, repeating the rest of the blocking process that we went over the front of the dress, ironing that freezer paper onto your fabric, making sure the shiny side of the freezer paper is facing down. Step 6, to smock or not to smock. At this point, you can continue with the construction if you wish, or you can stop and do your smocking. I've done it both ways. If you continue with the construction, you need to be very careful about those pleating threads. They can pull right out on you. It's kind of the risky way to go, honestly, but it is doable. However, if you are a beginner or just like to play things safe, go ahead and do the smocking now. Once you are done with the smocking, everything is secured down. You can remove the pleating threads. Sometimes a machine stitch will pierce through a pleating thread, and if you cut on either side of it, that section that has been pierced will come right out. I know it's kind of strange, but it works every time. Once all of my pleating threads were removed, I trimmed up 3/8 of an inch on the outside of the machine outline. I'm doing a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, but you could do 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch, whatever floats your boat. Then I join the shoulder seams together with right sides together. If you are nervous, you can introduce another piece of freezer paper, but as long as you go right on top or just very, very close to those outline stitches, everything will be fine. The pleats are secure at each of those points. everything will line up nicely. I iron those seams open. You can finish the raw edge with a serger, a zigzag, or a Hong Kong seam. Step 7. The arm's eye. To finish up that arm's eye, you have a few choices. You could do a sleeve, and I've done that before too, but if you want a sleeveless route, you need to be a little bit more creative. You can make bias strips out of your fabric or contrasting fabric to enclose the raw edges. You could also use a bias strip thing like this. There are a bunch of different options from farmhousefabrics.com if you want to go that route, or you could do some lace, which is what I am going to do. I'm sure there's plenty of other options that I'm not mentioning. To do the lace, I would highly suggest putting on some entredeaux first. Attaching lace straight on top of these pleats is asking a lot from your lace, so the entredeaux can do the heavy lifting instead and provide a clean transition. I attach the entredeaux using a straight stitch, and then I run a second row of straight stitches about 1/16 of an inch away from that first one. After that, I trim up just on the other side of the second row of straight stitches, and I zigzag over top of the straight stitches to tidy things up. From there, I trim up the other side of the entredeaux and I attach the lace like normal. One last thing to mention, I put my placket on before I attach the entredeaux and my lace to the neckline, and I extend the entredeaux lace assembly about 1/2 inch past the placket's edge so I can hand sew the raw edges under by hand later on. Finally, I join the side seams of the dress using French seams, and once you apply your hem treatment, you'll have yourself a fully constructed dress. I have a video on how I did the smocking design over here, as well as a fun video on shadow smocked hearts here. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments down below and I will do my best to answer them. And as always, I appreciate y'all for watching, and I hope to catch y'all next time.